Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to witness some scenes from the next attraction to play this theater. This picture, truly one of the most unusual ever filmed, contains scenes which, under no circumstances, should be viewed by anyone with a heart condition or anyone who is easily upset. We urgently recommend that if you are such a person or the parent of a young or impressionable child now in attendance, that you and the child leave the auditorium for the next 90 seconds.
There it is. Blood Feast. Howdy, Schlockaholics. Welcome back to another episode. You know the drill at this point. Today we're going to be sitting back and talking some schlock. Obviously, we're going to be focusing on Herschel Gordon Lewis's 1963 splatter classic, Blood Feast. This was directed by H. Lewis with a screenplay by Allison Louise Down, who I think did write a few of Herschel's movies back in the day. Based on a story by David F. Freeman and H.G. Lewis. It was produced by David F. Freeman. It stars Mal Arnold, William Kerwin, Connie Mason, Lynn Bolton, and Scott H. Hall. Not to be confused with Scott Hall of wrestling fame, Razor Ramon. He's not in this film, unfortunately. It was also shot by H.G. Lewis, with editing by Robert Sinise and Frank Romulo. Music by H.G. Lewis. It was distributed by Box Office Spectaculars and released on July 6th of 1963. It runs a cool 67 minutes. All of it is pretty terrible and pretty awesome in equal measure. So this was definitely not my first rodeo Blood Feast, but I think it was yours, Brandon. You know, had you been aware of what's kind of your history of awareness, at least with the film, and what did you think of it upon watching it?
Well, I was introduced to the director because of, Wizard of Gore. I actually saw the remake of it first, and I had heard about the Wizard of Gore because of a little movie called, oh gosh, what is that movie with, she's a he now. God, what was it? Ellen Page.
Oh, don't they talk about it in fucking Juno or whatever?
Juno, that's it. Yeah, and I remember
her dad
him
rents it or something,
and seeing like screenshots of it. So I had to find it, and then when I found it, I found the remake, and I liked the remake. And then I said, no, I got to see the original this dude was talking about. And then that Herschel Gordon Levitt set came out by Arrow. And they had discounted it by 50%. And I said, there's no way. This is a sign. So then I got it. And then I only watched that one movie. And then I got distracted by everything else, as I do. and I meant to come back to it. So I know it in as far as it was in the box set, and that I meant to come back to it one day.
Right on. That's so badass that you got turned on to him because of Juno as well. I do remember getting a kick out of that in the movie. It's such a random thing to plug into a movie like that, but it's cool. I'm glad it had the effect.
Totally different vibe.
Yeah, it's definitely not in the same wheelhouse as H.G. Lewis. So what did you think of Blood Feast overall? I mean, you'd seen Wizard of Gore up to this point, and I know that you did watch The Scum of the Earth the other day.
Because they're on the same disc. I had,
Right.
I like it. If they're two on one disc, I just feel like, why not? And it was a break from all the movies that I'd been watching from Dave. And there are a lot. Matter of fact, I finished every horror movie that he sent that was opened. I have now watched.
Nice. Congrats, man.
And compared to those, this one is very good. I mean, not all. I mean, some of them are really, some of the ones he sent are pretty good. But comparatively to a lot of those, this one's pretty good. I also like that it's got a historic element to it, debatably being the first splatter film. I mean, there might be competition for it, but from what he said, at least in his introduction, it was. So it's kind of cool to be able to see one of the films that started it all. So it's kind of like watching history, really. If I'm going to,
quite literally. I mean, there's definitely movies I think that had a bit of blood or gore by this point. You could even look at stuff like Yojimbo with like the severed hands and stuff and that. I mean, there was movies that had graphic violence in them, but I think Blood Feast I think it's accurate to say it was probably the first one where showing that graphic violence and all its gory, blood-red detail was, the main focus of the movie, So I don't think H.G. Lewis would probably lay claim to being the first person to ever put splatter in a movie, but he was the first person to make a splatter movie, if that makes sense.
Probably the first to put it center stage, if anything.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at.
Because weren't giallos going strong at this time too? Or was that 70s? Or was that 80s?
It's more the 70s and the 80s, but it was starting to heat up and become a thing for sure, I think, by this point. You had some of the earlier ones, and those definitely were known for showing a bit more graphic violence than our standard horror fare over here was showcasing at the time. But I mean, there's a reason that H.G. Lewis influenced so many of the guys that would go on to really popularize splatter films, because this was it, for the time period. It was, if you wanted to see that truly ghastly gore, you kind of had to go to this dude's movies for a little while there.
It gave me a giallo feel, but not as artsy.
Yes, it's very it's like some gutter giallo. It's not trying to be fanciful about any of it or push any high concepts or anything or dreamlike atmosphere. It's just, I think any of the actual atmosphere the movie has is mostly accidental. So I became aware of H.G. Lewis because when you're a horror fan, you watch horror movies and then eventually you see some of the gorier stuff. Like as a kid, I'd seen Dawn of the Dead and shit like that. And there's some pretty visceral gore in that shit. But for whatever reason, just pure luck, I'd never ran across other movies that were quite that level of gory until around like freshman year of high school when I started seeing shit like The Beyond and, a lot of Italian stuff, a lot of the cannibal films and whatnot. And I started getting interested in the more explicit, like gore film side of things at that stage. And naturally, when you start looking into that stuff and trying to figure out the history of it, you get introduced to H.G. Lewis. And so I sought out Blood Feast and checked it out. I think the first time that I saw Blood Feast was through Netflix in the mail. And then I ended up buying my copy of it that Cody now has at Hastings, like not long afterwards. I went in there and was able to snag a copy of that. And that was the only H.G. Lewis movie I owned for a long time. All the other ones I ended up watching on Netflix through the mail as well. Same thing with Wizard of Gore. But I have the Feast set now as well, so they're sitting in the collection where they belong. And I'm probably, well, we're going to be discussing all of them because those are going to be my picks for the foreseeable future.
Be watching through that box set.
Yeah, I might fall asleep with you though and go ahead and watch Scum of the Earth again because I haven't seen it since I got the box set, and I did enjoy it for what it was. So I think I'll give that another look. But Blood Feast, it really is kind of a mind-blowing experience that first time you see it, and you have to keep reminding yourself, like, this was 1963. You know, like they were doing this shit in the early 60s, not even the late, almost 70s, 60s. It's early fucking 60s. We're still in the, what is it, like the Summer of Love and shit like that. I don't know what year exactly that took place, but this is the heart of the 60s right here. Hippies were running amok, and this guy was out there killing bimbos at the beach, you know. It's like, he's well ahead of his game.
I could tell that with I could tell 60s when I was watching Scum of the Earth. That felt like 60s, except for the nudity. It felt like 60s pretty much straight through. This actually had the feel of what I consider 70s horror.
Yeah.
And but considering he led the way for it, I guess that makes sense because a lot of those horrors had pull from him. I mean, I've got the plot breakdown for me as guy breaking into places and stabbing single women to death.
Pretty much, yeah. Harvesting specific organs from various ones so that you can use them as part of this Egyptian feast for the ancient goddess Ishtar that he is trying to organize for reasons. It's sort of, you know, vaguely hinted at in that I think he plays the dude doing the sacrifice in the flashback during like the college lecture or whatever that they go to on it. I think he plays the young dude in that's sacrificing the lady without the gray grease paint in his hair or whatever. So that sort of vaguely suggests that he's like a descendant or whatever of whoever was doing these fucking rituals for their own reasons before. It's part of like some spring festival. They share details on it. Not a lot of it's very relevant to the plot of the film or makes much sense, but I mean, I guess it's there, so they have things to say, and that's fine.
I didn't think story was the number one draw for this anyway, so
it really, really isn't. It's pretty much the gore and the cheesy dialogue, and delivers that many times over. You will walk away satisfied if you go into this looking for that kind of shit. And that's pretty much the only plot rundown we can give you. You know, this lady hires this guy, Fuad Ramses, or Fuad, as they say sometimes in the film, to cater her daughter's party. They're like snooty rich people. She wants something extravagant and exotic or whatever. And this is back in the 60s. So anything that was like Middle Eastern, I guess it's still kind of looked at that way, that stuff's like exotic, right? That's a very American way to look at it, but it's, you know, anything that's not from like white countries, basically. It's exotic and mysterious and mystical or whatever. I guess, yeah. And so she hires this dude who seems to just run a general store, but I guess he also does catering. I suppose that probably was more of a thing in the 60s. I don't know. I've never ran into that personally. Usually catering businesses are like a fully separate thing. But
I actually had a note on that because I'm looking, it's like, I love the way that they lay out the general stores. And they don't do it like that these days for the most part. I mean, closest thing I can think of these days is maybe a Trader Joe's, but I love how they had those stores laid out, and I love the secret chamber that he goes to with the golden idol. I thought that was a really cool background and backdrop for this type of thing.
For sure, man. Their cans for their canned food and shit back then too really did look like they would survive an atomic bomb. You know, I don't know. There's just something so flimsy looking about all of our canned goods nowadays compared to back then. Like you have like milk, you need the little church key thing to open or whatever. It was different times. You know, I think a lot of it probably was informed too by them thinking that they would need to survive an atomic bomb. Now the Campbell soup's just got a little pull tab. You just open it and you eat it. And you
Oh,
don't
the
think
world
about
was
keeping
ending.
it.
Every
It
day the
still
world
is,
was
but just a lot slower than they anticipated back then. Yeah, I love the worship chamber too. That idol is pretty dope. I don't think that there was much research put into making it legitimately Egyptian or any of that. I think it's just kind of this vague idea of Egyptianness that exists in Blood Feast, and that's, again, fine, because no one really gives a fuck about the plot of this movie. You don't need to. It's
Yeah, I
just
don't think he
there
was.
to... Go ahead.
I don't think he was trying to sell out Egyptian theaters with this.
No, not at all. Yeah, I don't think he was an Egyptophile or whatever the hell like our main dude Pete is in the movie. But pretty much, there's already these murders taking place as she hires Fuad to cater her daughter's party. He's been going around collecting these organs, preparing this feast, and this situation just kind of falls into his lap where this lady needs this party catered. So he figures, hey, two birds with one stone. I'll do this job, and I'll also use it as a way to facilitate this feast and complete the ceremony or whatever. The whole idea of it basically being that everyone has a cannibal feast as, worship to this goddess that's going to provide them with a bountiful year or something. I don't know. I don't think they ever really explain it.
Well, he'd get along with a lot of these others, like Children of the Corn and all these other people.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's, I think there's a lot of ancient rituals that are like that around the world. You hear a lot about the Mayan stuff here because they're like, the Mayans were just right down below us in South America and shit like that. But I think, mostly all those like ancient civilizations that worshiped sun gods and whatnot had some sort of sacrifice rituals in their cultures. And I think that's just what they're building on here as an excuse for this guy to put together an Egyptian feast of, people flesh. And presumably he would have, had things went to plan, he would have sacrificed the final girl and then fed all those chicks to everybody at this party, which is pretty gnarly. It does not end up working out that way. He's caught in the act.
Yeah.
And we get one of the worst chase scenes ever filmed in a fucking movie. Somehow this guy stays like a solid 100 yards ahead of these dudes.
Well,
and he's running with a limp,
I don't think they get much exercise. One of the notes I even put in is like, man, these cops, they don't ever leave their desks. I mean, 90% of the movie, they're sitting at their desks with coffee and stuff, just talking about it.
Dude, the one guy couldn't even be bothered to learn his lines. If you look at the police chief, he's reading his fucking lines off the palm of his hand through the whole movie. Literally, like he's looking down at the palm of his hands. I'm sure it's not full lines. I don't think he had the whole script written on there, but it's at least like bullet points so that he could remember which lines he was supposed to be talking about. I mean, there's just so many little weird things like that in this movie that just highlight the low budgetness of it too. Like there's a point where for some reason they recreate the interior of a convertible with a clear stage curtain behind them to shoot dialogue scenes in this car because they clearly did not have the equipment to shoot like actual dialogue out on the beach where they parked, so they build like this faux dashboard and windshield for them to sit behind, and they're sitting back there reading their lines. It's pretty great. Yeah, I mean, it's, there's that, the dude reading the lines off of his hand. There's parts where they didn't have the ability to have like police lights, so it's very clearly like a dude just shining a flashlight through a colored gel and like moving it to simulate the emergency lights and stuff. It's glorious. There's dudes, holding flashlights that aren't turned on while they're trying to investigate the sacrificial chamber. It's just, it has everything like on a technical level in it that you are going to enjoy if you enjoy low budget schlock cinema. The soundtrack sounds totally deranged because it's just H.G. Lewis, like, I guess, playing whatever he knew how to play on some type of like cheap organ. And it just fits the movie so perfectly. I think it gives it a truly deranged quality that for sure enhances the violence that you're watching take place there.
I mean, and I know that like some of the stuff and the challenges, I mean, the lighting, obviously they had to do a lot of daytime shots, which were nighttime shots.
Mm-hmm.
It really just looked like this guy was just walking in people's apartments in broad daylight, killing them off. And then I realized like 2/3 of the film in, I'm like, oh, it's supposed to be nighttime. I'm supposed to realize it's nighttime when he's doing this, even though it's daytime when he's doing it. And I'm just like, oh, okay, I got you. There was not really much obvious there until later on. I finally got what they were, it's like, yep, this tonight here. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah, right. It's supposed to be, the cover of night, not just vaguely overcast. Because that's what it looks like in the scenes. Like, I guess it was just an overcast day when they were shooting this. Nope, it's supposed to be fucking nighttime. The weekend's shaping up pretty good so far, JR. Hope it's going good for you as well. So basically, the movie really plays out as a series of really kind of cringe-inducing scenes with the police officers delivering their bad dialogue and talking to other people that are also delivering bad dialogue, and then Fuad going around chopping people up. I think the movie starts out with him sawing a girl's leg off in her hotel room or whatever, in the bathtub. So you're literally greeted with, a full-on severed limb, meat just dripping off a blade, basically full frontal nudity. And again, this is a movie from 1963. It pulls no punches when it comes to that.
You know what I'm wondering is if I noticed one thing with the music, that the drum beat, of course, it gets faster and faster when he's close. And then like there's one scene, for instance, where he gets closer and then he pulls away and then the drum beat gets softer, which I'm starting to wonder is like, maybe Spielberg saw this and got the idea, or whoever did the music for Jaws, where it would get like that. I wonder if that was an inspiration for that. Like, oh, let's take the music and make it louder when he's closer and faster, and then, softer and slower when he's away.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, man. And it does almost have the rhythm isn't the same as the Jaws tune, but there's a vibe about it that is kind of reminiscent of the Jaws tune, I guess. Yeah, and he is kind of like a shark out there swimming around, kind of awkwardly looking for his prey. Actually have a pretty good shark beer that I'm going to be diving into later when I check out a little bit more of that Manhunter game. It's called Megalodon IPA. It should be pretty good. Howdy, Michael. Thanks for coming and christening the stream. Yes. But yeah, that's an interesting observation there, man. I never put the two and two together with this and Jaws as far as the music, but there's some similarities to that for sure. It's worth looking into. I think that the score is a great example of like accidental brilliance. Like I said, I don't think H.G. Lewis is a super accomplished musician or anything. I think that he knew how to play a little bit of church organ. And like a true low-budget pioneer, he took those rudimentary skills and his vision of how he wanted it to work for his movie and did the best that he could. And it just so happens that the two really work well together. There's kind of like an awkward pacing to the music that can only happen if you don't super know how to play it. But it adds an unhinged creepiness to the shit that it wouldn't have, I think, if they were trying to do it on purpose,
And though the acting is kind of the range of good to terrible is quite impressive here. Like the killer himself, I did like how he got the creepy vibe. I did love how at the end he legitimately looked like they were all going to just sit down and have this blood feast with him. No questions asked. Like, oh yeah, this looks good. Let's do this. Yeah. I mean, he was just casually lifting the knife, like, yeah, that's fine. And I love that because that is the kind of unhinged that makes sense with this sort of thing.
Oh, definitely. And honestly, his terrible makeup job turning him into an old man. Because if you've seen Scum of the Earth, he's clearly like not even a middle-aged dude. I think he's kind of young, actually. But they put like some
interesting thoughts on that one too, but I'll wait for that for later.
Yeah, we're probably going to circle back to it at some point. It's worth talking about.
All those teenagers.
See, that's so funny that in like that, he's okay. The dude who plays Fuad is clearly like a younger fella. He's not old. In Scum of the Earth, though, he's too old to be playing a fucking teenager. But in this, he's too young to be playing the old man that they have him playing. So it's like, for whatever reason, H.G. Lewis could just never cast this dude as an appropriate aged character for his actual age. Like in this, he's got the grease paint eyebrows. Like who was it? Charlie Chaplin, or who's the dude that had the grease paint? And then his hair is clearly they sprayed some probably like cancer-ridden 1960s spray paint into his hair to make it look old. And then he walks with a limp. That's like the other thing he could do to make the character seem like an old man. And honestly, the limp adds a lot to it, I think. It makes him even creepier than he would be if he was just shambling around normally, I guess. I don't know. Nothing against people that have to walk with a limp, but when you're carrying a machete, it makes it look real cool. What's that?
He was a good villain. I had no objections to him as the horror villain for this movie. Yeah, because I think he did a pretty good job. But yeah, he's I swear he got to be in his mid-20s or early 30s. I swear he looked older, actually, in Scum of the Earth than he does here.
He might a little bit, yeah. And he's like playing a teenager there or something. And then in this, he's playing like an old 60-year-old guy or something like that. I think they also did put like, who knows what it was, you know, a little liquid latex if that existed, or some type of Elmer's glue or something to make his face look a little wrinkly. But that they did the best they could to age the dude with what they had. And honestly, when you look at the rest of the sort of, I don't know what you call it, like, I don't know if dreamlike is the right word. This movie's got a strange quality to it that everything together makes it where you can buy this dude as an old man, because it's like not even the crappiest thing in the movie, you know?
Well, yeah, I never had a problem with it. There wasn't a time this wasn't like Scum of the Earth where I was constantly confronted with him telling me he's a teenager the whole time. And he looks like, well, not with that widow's peak, you're not. And if you are, I'm really sad for you. But you know, as far as this one, I wasn't really, it didn't really bother me. But then again, I usually give these types of movies a pass on a lot of these things because, you know, they don't work with a lot of money. So I'm just like, yeah, that's fine. I can accept a lot of stuff. Just don't throw it in my face. Like, don't tell me you're a teenager constantly so that it brings right back. I mean, if he was constantly going, I was like, yes, I'm an old man over and over again. I'd
Right.
Oh, no, you're not.
Yeah, I don't think it's really mentioned other than when they're describing him and they say that one of the only things that they remembered was like gray hair and wild eyes or whatever. And so they're like, oh, it must be an older gentleman we're looking for. Like, that's the only time that Fuad's age is really focused on in the movie until the very like last 5 minutes of the movie, where he's trying to sacrifice Connie Mason or whatever. And he's like, oh, don't break an old man's heart or whatever. Like, that's the only time he ever refers to himself as an old man in the movie. And you're right. It goes a long way towards making you not hyper focused on the fact that this dude is clearly like 30 playing a guy that's supposed to be like 60. And like what I'm kind of getting at is Blood Feast, though, where other movies we might give it a pass because the movies are crap. Blood Feast is crap, you know, but it's like it creates this strange reality that makes it all believable. I mean, the guy's also supposed to be Egyptian. He doesn't have any accent to speak of, really, other than that he does his lines a little bit weird, like he's doing a drunken Bela Lugosi impersonation or something.
Hey, we all accepted Charlie Chan as an Asian guy.
There you go. Let us not forget John Wayne playing fucking Genghis Khan or whatever. It was different times back then, you know, but I don't think any Egyptians are going to be offended by Blood Feast. It's too ridiculous to to take any real offense to, I think. Really, the best actors. What's good?
It's now their national film.
Right? There's Blood Feast Day every year in Egypt. I think, Fuad, I forget the name of the dudes who painted these guys, and I don't have notes handy on it in that capacity. I guess I could just click the fucking Wikipedia tab here. William Kerwin is a guy that he plays Pete, Detective Pete in the movie. I think he's actually credited as Thomas in the film, at least according to Wikipedia, and who knows what that is. Maybe it's some sort of Hollywood union thing he had to get around. He's pretty much the only guy other than Mal Arnold who plays Fuad that have any acting ability whatsoever in this film. Pete is actually pretty convincing. He's also the main hero guy, I believe, in 2000 Maniacs, which we'll be doing as my next selection for the H.G. Lewis series here on Schlockaholics. And I think he did like one or two other movies for H.G. Lewis as well. And then obviously Fuad was in Scum of the Earth, and I think he's in one or two other ones as well. And Lewis wasn't super known for using like a stable of actors like a lot of B-movie guys, because most of the people he had in his movies couldn't act, so there'd be no reason to keep calling them back for every film. He would just kind of get together whatever people were stragglers from his Nudie Cutie productions that he would do at the time, and he'd put them with whatever local assholes wanted to get involved or whoever he could get at random open casting calls, and he would get these movies made to make a buck. And that's also something I feel like is very prevalently obvious in H.G. Lewis shit, is that he's not necessarily doing this stuff to be an artist. I think he was doing it as a business, he's trying to make these shocking, salacious films or whatever to put butts in seats in cars and drive-ins, and it fucking worked. He made a very profitable business from doing this stuff for a lot of years. And when you watch Blood Feast, and you kind of put yourself in the shoes of somebody, especially a horror fan in like the 1960s, this had to have been like a huge word of mouth movie that you would have been telling all your friends about, like, oh, you got to see this thing. It's fucking insane. Girls are getting cow tongues ripped out of their mouths. And I'm pretty sure if I saw this back then without the context of other splatter movies to judge it against, I might have been offended by it or shocked, or thought that he maybe actually killed a couple of these girls or something like that. Because the kills themselves, which are the main feature of the film, are pretty grisly. Like we said, we got the girl getting her legs sawed off in the bathtub at the beginning. He bashes a girl's brains out on the beach. I love especially the part there where there's like a boa constrictor in the sand and it's like recoiling away from her brain matter. Like, this guy is so much of a predator that he's even grossing out the other predators on the beach, Like, it's such a good touch, which I'm sure, again, was accidental. Actually, I want to say they admit as much in like a commentary or something. Like, they just wanted a snake in the scene because that's what you would do in horror movies back in the day. Sometimes you just put like an armadillo or a snake or something to look weird, an iguana, just to give the scene a little extra seasoning, I guess. I don't know. We got a girl getting her tongue ripped out. We got a girl who gets her face mutilated off camera. So there's like, even as much as they showed you in this, there's that one kill where they kind of do pull a punch on it and not show him totally disfigure this woman. Because I think even they knew that they were already going pretty far with it. So maybe a little bit of restraint was in order. And then we get some pretty great scenes of him, taking these ingredients that he's been like, butchering off of these women and cooking them up and doing his best to make that Egyptian feast, man. He's broiling the shit in his dry ice fucking oven and putting it in the bubbling cauldron and all that stuff. And it's fairly disgusting, especially given the time period that it was coming out in. I don't know. What do you think, man? You've seen a lot of movies from the 60s. We both have. If you like the creepiest horror film you'd ever seen up to this point was like Psycho, how do you think you'd react to something like this?
Yeah, I mean, the creepiest things that would have probably come out of this at this time would be Psycho or some of those stuff from William Castle. Because this is actually were the Hammer films out at this time?
I think so.
Because the Hammer
First couple of
films,
waves of them.
because the Hammer films come close. I mean, not to this level, but they come close when I say like blood itself, because there is a lot of blood in the Hammer Dracula. They try to make it a little bit more disturbing, but at the same time, I don't think that there's been anything that's just straight out gore like this. Really and truly, this is definitely the way, because in the 70s there's a ton of films like this, because that was, to me, the 70s is the era of splatter films. I mean, that is the golden era of the splatter film. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, by then they had the formula figured out, where they were like, if we put a bunch of nudity and sadistic violence in there and make it the kind of thing that people will be outraged by, or at least seems like the type of thing people will be outraged by, the word of mouth will help sell the movie tickets and put those butts in those seats. And I think dudes like, obviously, H.G. Lewis had a hand in creating that formula with movies like this, you know. I think that it's easy with us, you know, from a modern perspective and being kind of desensitized with all the horror films and splatter films that we've seen, to look at something like this and be like, oh, it's not really that bad. But it's important to try to push all that shit out of your mind. And like we were saying, think of this from that perspective of maybe Psycho or some Hammer films, a handful of other things that you may have seen at the time. I could see almost being like scared to go watch this a second time if I saw it back in the day. I for sure would have, you know, because that would have been part of the fun, is that thrill. But it's some pretty chunky gore in this, and it's all like real animal bits and stuff. They weren't making this shit out of like latex. They didn't have the ability. So he pulls like a real cow tongue out of a girl's mouth.
Yeah, that was probably the most disturbing scene that I had seen when it came to this movie, was that cow tongue scene. I mean, I knew what they were doing without having to, you know, look it up or anything, but still, you know what I mean. I mean, it's
effective, dude.
Yeah, it's still effective in what it does.
Yeah, he pulls the tongue out, and then she's like laying there with her mouth all gaped open, and there's like red jello falling out of her mouth or something, and it just looks disgusting, you know.
And that's something that's interesting for the time. Of course, they hadn't perfected blood on the screen for color yet. And you can always tell that, because the blood in those days, in the 60s and 70s, it was this bright red that just like you could see for a mile away. It might as well glow in the dark.
Yeah, it looks like fucking house paint, you know. It's
I kind of miss that. We need to go back to that.
There's a special quality to it. Those Hammer films kind of have that same sort of blood too, where it's that house paint sort of vibe. And I think one of the last ones we really got with it in terms of like mainstream horror films was like Dawn of the Dead, where he stabs the dude with the screwdriver. And I know that they're not happy with that scene in Dawn of the Dead, but I love it because it gives it that like almost comic book feel, you know? Like when I see blood like this in these sort of movies, it reminds me of if you could somehow make like some of those old Tales from the Crypt comic strips. Well, they did make a lot of those in color when they did the show. What the fuck am I talking about? But you know what I mean? Like, it's like what I imagine that aesthetic would be if those things were live action at the time, you know, not in the 90s when they were doing it on HBO or wherever that fucking show was coming out of. It's real well done, man. And, you know, I think probably the worst effect in the movie is that flashback sacrifice where they're cutting the girl's heart out with that lame plastic dagger. But that almost also feels like it might have been like test footage they shot, or, you know, maybe wasn't even related to this movie, and they just figured out a way to use it for Blood Feast.
Oh, yeah.
But it works, man. So we've talked a little bit about the performances, but what we really need to touch on is Tony's legendary freak out on the beach after his girlfriend gets her brains bashed out. that kid never fails to just about kill me with laughter every time I watch this movie. I can't even do an imitation of his freak out because it would just make the audio quality of this shit. But if you've seen Blood Feast, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I don't have anything to add to that.
It's glorious, dude. It's fucking gloriously terrible acting. The fact that it wasn't cut completely from the movie is a true blessing, you know? And it just speaks to the fact that I don't think Herschel gave a fuck if these performances were good or not. As long as lines got read and it was a scene that he could edit into the movie later, I think he was like, cool, cut, print, let's move on, you know?
I understand that style of directing. I think that's how I did my film when I shot it.
It can work. And again, you know, this I think that's part of what makes Blood Feast charming. It doesn't try to be smarter or more refined than it is. You know, it knows exactly what it's doing, and it just gets it across in as effective a manner as possible. I mean, at the same time, everything we could say about these guys' terrible acting throughout the film, it doesn't take away from the plot because there isn't much of a plot, and it all makes sense for the most part. I mean, it's, you know, another really standout scene of fucking terrible acting is when I think that same girl's mother shows up at the police station and is like freaking out. And during that scene, you can see even Bill Kerwin is standing there like, this is getting awkward, man. Like, this is terrible. Is someone going to say cut at some point? Nope. It's just, we're just going to keep rolling, Bill.
It kind of reminds me of that scene in Thinner where you got the judge's wife going on that weird rant about her husband becoming this lizard man thing because of the curse. She was off the wall crazy out. But I was thinking about that more recently because I just had that brought up recently to me. But yeah, I had forgotten how much, because I just disliked Thinner overall, but I had forgotten how much weird shit was in Thinner.
I loved the book, but it's been a while since I've seen the movie. I might need to give that a revisit. It sounds terrible.
Oh, it's weird, crazy, and it's not great, but at the same time, most of these types of Stephen King films, you don't really expect great. It's a B movie in a way. I mean, shoot, I would put Thinner or Maximum Overdrive or Trucks or any of the others right here on Schlockaholics because it's schlock.
Oh, for sure.
And a lot of it was shot low budget, so.
Langoliers.
Oh, Lord. Actually, I like the Langoliers.
I do too, but.
And the end I actually didn't hate like most people did because I admit I didn't think it was scary, so maybe that was a bad thing. But I thought it gave me a great laugh at the end. So, I mean, it still worked. You're muted.
Yeah, it double clicked for some reason. It's interesting to see movies like this too, where you've got what's clearly a fully amateur cast with the one dude, Bill Kerwin, who has some acting experience just kind of floating through the movie. Like, honestly, maybe I'm alone here, but you know, it's when you watch this and you watch 2000 Maniacs and you see Bill's acting ability, he wouldn't be out of place in a more legitimate horror film.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, as Detective Pete in this movie, he is pretty convincing the whole time. He manages to make shit that I don't think most other actors would be able to sell as genuine, fairly genuine, like the whole confusion between Etar and Ishtar, and that somehow not being something he figured out right away. But the way he sells it just is so charming that I can't be mad at Bill Kerwin over that. You know, it was in the script. And I think he was the only dude who bothered to read the script. So he was doing a pretty good job of making it feel legitimate throughout the movie. And he's the only guy who turns on his fucking flashlight when they're investigating the hidden sacrificial cove. I don't know how that other dude couldn't even remember. I mean, he had to read his lines off the palm of his hand, but you think he would just naturally know to turn the flashlight on.
Well, you know, you have to be reminded it's nighttime when it's pure daylight outside.
That is true. There was a lot of that going on in the film, so I guess I could excuse it for that. It's also entirely possible it was out of batteries, and Herschel was not going to buy new batteries for the
too much extra cost.
Yeah, that's over budget for this thing here.
One of these days we have. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say one of these days we have to cover the movie The Eye Creatures, which
I've not seen it.
I've never seen it. It's sort of like how I like Time of the Apes, which I did finally see without Mystery Science Theater on it. But it's one I've only seen by Mystery Science Theater, and it is one that also does that daytime, nighttime thing, but it's black and white. But it's obvious that they are driving during the daylight. And so they keep trying to get you to buy that it's the middle of the night. And I'm like, maybe in those heavily wooded shots where it's got some shade, but not in those ones where you got them driving under the bright sun.
Oh, dude, it is so mystifying sometimes how they figure anyone could buy that. And then there's ones like Crater Lake Monster, which we definitely got to cover on here someday, where I think they shot it all thinking they would be able to like do some sort of corrections in post to make it look like night, which is generally what they do with those scenes. But they just, I think during the editing process, didn't get the notes or just said, fuck it, because there's parts in that movie where they're in broad daylight shining flashlights into this creature's footprint on the ground. And it's not even like this where it looks overcast during the day for night scenes. It just is broad daylight and they're shining a flashlight into the footprint. It never fails to fucking make me laugh, man. There's just something so genuinely schlocky and charming about that kind of crap. Didn't that movie Lake Michigan Monster kind of play with the day for night stuff a little bit as like a sort of rib against that stuff?
Yeah, they did, but they did that on purpose. So yeah,
right.
But Lake Michigan Monster, that was just that was an epic film that really did pay homage to a lot of this old school schlock, and I have a special kind of love for that. I'm glad Arrow did that unexpected release.
So fucking amazing, dude. I am definitely down to do another discussion for that on this channel because I think Cody would love it. I'll sit there and I'll fucking dip my fucking chicken fingers in bourbon the whole time for that movie. I mean, was it fish sticks or chicken fingers?
Fish sticks.
It might have been fish sticks. Yeah, he's dipping them in the bourbon. I'm willing to give it a try for science and for schlock. But yeah, Bill Kerwin and, Mel, whatever the hell his name is, Mel Arnold, are really the highlights acting-wise of the film. Again, it's not the type of movie that you go into expecting high levels of acting. So it's just it's a charming surprise to see that present, even with those characters. It is important to note, too, that I'm not sure if he's the first person to do it. Most certainly he wasn't. But in terms of sort of women from the adult entertainment industry being involved in horror films, I think that H.G. Lewis had a solid hand in starting that as more of a trend going into the 70s and obviously the 80s. It's still a thing that happens nowadays. But you have Connie Mason here, who was, I guess, like that year's Playmate of the Year or something like that. She was kind of a big deal. She's absolutely terrible. Her acting ability is non-existent. I don't know why she's playing the character as a little kid through most of the movie, even though she's supposed to be dating Bill Kerwin, which makes it a little bit creepy. I don't know. Did you have any thoughts on Connie Mason? That's the chick who's the party's getting catered for.
The one that's supposed to be the older one?
No, the girl in the pink and the white gloves at the end.
Oh, yeah, that's kind of a weird thing. Wasn't she also reading that book, Strange Rituals and so on?
Yeah, I think so.
I noticed that book. And that's the one thing I think I noted about her and about all these others is like that book was going around. And people weren't even involved were reading that book. I'm like, this must be like the new thing is like, let's do this. Maybe this dude was not planning this normally, but he saw a trend coming. And he was just going to be a trendsetter.
It's definitely possible. And it just occurred to me, too, that when did they find King Tut's tomb or whatever? Was that like a thing in the 60s?
I know that they dug it up in the 20th century, but when I do not know. But there was also a huge Egyptian thing in the 60s. A lot of mummy movies, a lot of like revivals of these types of things.
Right.
There was still
curious if, yeah, definitely. I think that there's a connection there, and maybe that's what Lewis was trying to play off when he did this. Was like, oh yeah, people like that Egypt stuff, so we'll just make the movie about Egypt. Yeah.
And it was a huge tourist destination at one time as well. I mean, it's still somewhat of a tourist destination now, but nowhere near as safe a tourist destination. So back then it was pretty straightforward. Not necessarily, but
I guess it was in like the 20s that they dug King Tut's tomb. Yeah. So I'm guessing that's what like started the Egypt craze that was still either going on or in people's memories at the time that shit like this and those other revival movies you were talking about came out. I'm sure much of those are a much better example of like, revival of the Egyptian theme. This is just kind of a loose drapery that goes over it to give it an exotic feel. Hell yeah, Chad's got good taste in schlock.
Shoot, they were eating mummies as health food back in those days.
That's right, weren't they? They're grinding up mummy dicks and snorting those for fucking youthful longevity or something. I don't know. I read about that actually not that long ago. That was a recent bit of knowledge. I did not know people were doing
that. Actually, dicks have a very prominent stance in history. They stand tall and proud.
They do.
All throughout history.
Who knows, man? Maybe this dude was snorting a bunch of mummy dicks and he just had a big old fucking monster down there. Maybe the limp wasn't because of an injury. It's because he's packing weight. I don't know. He did have a lot of balls towards the end of the movie. Well, let's talk about that, okay?
I haven't seen a death like that since Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie.
Yeah, I wonder if that's a reference to Blood Feast. I don't know. I don't think so.
That'd be a rather interesting place to put a Blood Feast reference, but yes,
it would be. I think I'm just gonna headcanon that for myself and start telling people that it's a reference to Blood Feast. So our buddy Fuad goes through all this effort to run away from these cops after his scheme to feed all these people is revealed. And he gets the fuck out of there and does, as we said, a surprisingly good job of keeping pace and outdistancing these cops, even while running with a limp. And at the end, I think because they just knew they had to end the movie and didn't know where to take it, they have him climb in the back of a fucking garbage truck and he gets squished. I don't know why he didn't just... What's that?
I think it's kind of funny, actually. I know I'm not supposed to laugh because I'm supposed to take it seriously, but... Right. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. I was laughing my head off. It's like, yeah.
Well, the way they set it up, you almost think that he like hopped on the side of it or something and he's going to like jerk the driver out and get away. But nope, feller just climbed right in the back and then didn't even try to get out when it starts to squish him. He just sits there and looks up at the thing as it crushes him. It is pretty comical. But it also very much feels like they just didn't know what to do with the end of the movie, and they're like, "Well, we're at this landfill, and there's a garbage truck, so here you go." And that's pretty much the movie, man. Dude goes around collecting body parts to do this feast. Shit ends up going sideways. He gets found out at the end. Gets squished by a garbage truck. I think that there's a lot of stuff in this movie that's unintentional comedy, but as Chad said, Lewis was pretty good with dark comedy as well, something that he definitely perfected more with his later films. But I think there are certain elements of this that probably were left in it because he knew that it would be comical. The guy seemed like he had a good eye for schlock, stuff that was gonna, like, I'm sure the Tony scene, Lewis knew that it was crap and this kid just butchered the line reading. But he also knew that he couldn't afford to keep reshooting it, and that it would be something people might get a kick out of, so he just left it in there. And I think that explains a lot of the oddities that are present in Blood Feast. Is half of it's accident and half of it is Lewis just saying, fuck it, people will get a kick out of it either way.
Actually, Chad has something, has a good point there. Cutting it out 70 minutes and doing a double feature. I mean, shoot, that's how I watched it. Is I watched this as a double feature for, for his films. So that's kind of cool that I did it that way. Actually, I felt,
for sure, yeah, old school grindhouse drive-in style. I think a lot of these movies you couldn't even sell them to like theaters unless you could pair them up for a double feature somehow. And I know I've heard about dudes that knew that they were shooting a movie to be the second half of a double feature before they even started production on the film.
Yeah,
like a distributor would be like, "Oh, here's 2 titles. You can choose which one you want to direct."
Actually, I can think of some modern directors. Oddly enough, not me, because I had Mo knows already that when I was filming Amityville webcam, we were doing multiple takes. But I do know of what was a micro budget filmmakers that do only one take and just like, yep, good. Are you sure? I tripped. I don't care. Move on.
Yeah, it makes some sense, but nowadays with everything being digital, I feel like doing at least a couple and then the final one for safety can't hurt.
Well, I think if he had the modern access, he'd probably be filming this stuff with like iPhones and stuff. But but he would be willing to do multiple takes because film cost a lot of money. That was one of the issues with Ed Wood, is that Ed Wood knew he could not afford multiple takes because he could only afford so much film to shoot on. So it had to be egregious for him to start over. And even sometimes then he didn't do that either. But that's the thing, is that the film cost a lot of money back then.
It really did. I think one of the only sort of semi-affordable ways to shoot was to shoot it on like the used ends or whatever, the unused ends of film canisters. You could get those as like a discount. So you get 2 or 3 minutes worth of film that you could shoot and then splice that together with another, leftovers reel and get another 2 or 3 minutes in there. I don't think that if H.G. Lewis was doing these movies now with modern technology and the ability to do multiple takes, that they'd be much more artistic than they are or whatever. I think he might have afforded them 2 or 3 takes at the most, but it still could have improved some of the scenes. But would that improve the movie is the question,
Maybe, but to me, I think movies like this, it's much better to just let it roll and see what kind of mishaps happen, just because it adds to the mystique. I mean, there are some modern schlock films that I look at today and I say, you really should have done multiple takes. Try not to call out directors here, so I'm not. Though I'm sure many of us know ones that might be. And I can think of one particular movie that I watched a while back that I had said, did you not think to at least say, let's try it again and not fall asleep while you were reading your line?
Well, see, and therein lies the magic of it, right? Like, what makes this charming is that it was shot fast and quick and down and dirty, and the one take thing is very much a necessity of the way that they were doing the film. It's not a product of laziness. It's a product of just necessity and, speed. And that allows for there to be some charm with that. With these guys nowadays that just do the one cut and it's good enough or whatever, a lot of times it can come across as like lazy, like they don't really care how the movie turns out, I'm sure there's things about this movie that Lewis would have said that he would have liked to have been different, but he had a good enough of an eye for it to know what was good enough to keep in there to begin with. Like Tony's Freakout, that movie, that whole portion of the movie really doesn't need to be in there. It could have been taken out and replaced with a scene where Detective Pete just kind of delivers the exposition on what happened with that kid after the fact and left it there. But he shot the scene and put it in the movie, I think, because he knows that he knew that it was going to be at least comical and charming, you know. So there's still some care involved, even though it obviously is being done kind of haphazardly. What's up?
And there's some movies that can finesse that really well. And you can see that in this, that I think it works well. I mean, yeah. I mean, like I say, his creativity level, the way that they were edited, things worked well with that one take philosophy. I mean, if I was to compare, say, Blood Feast with, say, a modern film that appears, I might be wrong, it might have done multiple takes, but appears to have done only one take, like Amityville Karen, good example. Not necessarily one of the directors I was talking about, but this is a good enough film example of something that could have benefited from a lot of extra takes. One feels like it plays it off well, and it almost feels like it benefits it. The other just feels sort of like that joke that you realize wasn't quite right, but you laugh at it anyway because it was still funny, and that joke that you just go,
right. You know, there's also a genuineness to the performances in this, that even the ones that are pure ass, those people are trying to give Lewis the best that they've got, you know. I'm sure Tony, in his heart of hearts and his tiny, tiny little brain, thought that he was giving like an Oscar-winning performance out there on that beach. Sure. You know, he was acting his ass off. It was terrible, but you know, there's that genuine sort of effort behind it that I think is also lost on the actors' end of things with some of these modern movies that kind of have that lazy vibe, where they also know that they don't have to try really because they know that the dude's just going to take whatever take they get, you know. Whereas with Lewis, I don't know that there was a good way to get a read on this guy, especially back in these days. He wasn't the nicest dude all the time, and I don't think he was giving these guys a lot of creative feedback. I think that, you know, it's easy in hindsight to look at him as the Schlockmeister, but I think these people that were doing these films with him back then might have been a little bit more intimidated by him and might have been, you know, concerned about giving an actual good performance, unsure of how this dude might react if they didn't do exactly what he was envisioning there. He's made some pretty biting comments about the women in this film over the years. I know the one girl whose brain he bashed out, he said something to the effect of like, she didn't have any brains to work with, so we had to go to the butcher shop and get her some, or something like that. Some of that makes some sense in the fact that Lewis did a lot of nudie films on the side of this. So a lot of these girls basically are like, for lack of a better, more sensitive modern term, a lot of them were kind of like porn star bimbo chicks, you know. And they look real good on camera, so that's why Lewis put them in the movie. But I think he had some small amount of disdain for their abilities as actors and their abilities to read lines. Because if you notice, like, only Connie Mason has actual lines in the movie. All the other women are like mute characters, you know. And I'm sure it was contractually obligated to have lines, you know, because she's like a name star that they brought in. I think the only other chick that has lines is the girl on the beach that does get her brains bashed out. And I didn't find her particularly bad. You know, some of those comments that he made could have been directed towards Tony, more so than whatever that young lady's name was. But I guess what I'm getting at is I think a lot of these people would have been eager to try and like do a good job for Herschel or impress him a little bit. They probably felt like they were making more legitimate movies at the time that they were doing it, at least with these first few. So that adds a genuineness to even the shitty performances that you can get in a lot of modern schlock, because people know that it's not a big deal, you know.
Oh, yeah, I mean, one of these days we'll have to do some Ed Wood stuff, and of course, hit Plan 9, and also the remake of Plan 9 that John Johnson did, and hit those, do some comparisons, but also because there were a lot of people who want to blow up my phone, who thought they were doing something bigger than they are now, and probably could look back and are pretty ashamed of it, or in many cases pretty proud of it because of the historic nature. But of course, I don't know if anybody from that church that funded Plan 9 is necessarily proud of it. But you know, now if I was in that, I would say, like, you know what? No, my church was a part of film history. Even though Plan 9, even though I love Plan 9, of course, it's not my favorite Ed Wood film, but definitely things like that. And also as a thing, I do not knock anybody for liking Amityville Karen. It wasn't for me, but I do know that people did like it.
Yeah, every turd's got its audience, you know. I mean, there's people, I'm sure that. Go ahead.
No, as you said.
Yeah, I'm sure there's people that think that even by schlock standards, some of the H.G. Lewis stuff is like unwatchable or whatever. I would disagree. I think that it's got all this charming stuff going for it. The 60s and 70s vibes of his films works really well. You know, all the stuff that we've talked about makes for a charming experience with an H.G. Lewis film, and it's pretty much present in all of them. I do think later in his career, people knew what they were making with him, so there's a certain attitude shift in some of the performances, but it's for the better. You know, when you watch later H.G. Lewis movies like Gruesome Twosome or Gore Girls or Wizard of Gore, I think there's still that sort of sincere cornball, like, campiness to the performances, but there's like a little bit more of an edge to them because the people are aware that they're doing a movie with H.G. Lewis and it's going to be fucking entertaining, regardless of if it's good or not, you know? So even towards the end of his career, he still managed to have people taking their campy performances in his low budget movies somewhat seriously, you know, whereas a lot of the films that are getting made nowadays, or the filmmakers that are making them, don't necessarily command that same kind of respect, I don't think, for the product that they're making at the end of the day. They're like, oh, this will be a cool thing to fulfill the Indiegogo donations that I put in there. And they just go in there and they read their lines and they're kind of done with it. I seriously have my doubts that Lewis ever would have thought to do a movie with like an Indiegogo backer, you know, or if they would have survived the process. You know? It's the dude was a proper schlockmeister from the days of old, you know. There's not too many of those guys out there still doing films anymore the way that they used to. Even Fred Olen Ray is like semi-retired. I mean, you've got the dudes like Sherlock and Seaver that come back with a film every now and again, and they're still active. But I think that the time for dudes like Lewis passed a long time ago, you know. I don't think the dude would be too interested in making too many more films nowadays because of the purely disposable nature of a lot of it, and the fact that it's really hard to get people that are, you know, tapped into that same sort of genuine, innocent sort of vibe that he could twist into these grotesque little films and pull these performances out of them that just always make for a chuckle, you know. So I guess on that note, you know, what of the H.G. Lewis movies in the set that you haven't seen, which ones probably grab your eye the most in terms of future discussions?
Well, I mean, of course, the ones I haven't seen, probably the two that you mentioned, Gruesome Twosome and the Thousand Maniacs. Those are both ones I keep hearing about over and over again, and I've heard about those before. I had heard about H.G. Lewis. So I've been very curious about those. I'm, I mean, I know one of the last statements I can make about it fully is that, in my opinion, all films are art at some level or another. And to me, there is no such thing as bad art. It's just the audience of that art might not be me, but I know that all art has its audience. I'm hoping that the rest of this set will also be for me as well. But we will see.
Yeah, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. I think the one that's going to be the sleeper hit of the set that will make for one of the more interesting discussions is going to be Color Me Blood Red. I think that's one of his more underrated splatter flicks, but man, is it a good one, and probably has some of the best performances in any H.G. Lewis movies. So.
One of my favorite older films is Bucket of Blood, which is considered a bad film, but I was like, why? It's not that bad. I like it. It's great, so it's there. So we'll see how it goes.
Indeed. So I guess in closing, you got a favorite scene, I guess, or a favorite character from this?
I kind of liked the scene where he was introducing a lot of the stuff that he was doing when he went down to his secret dungeon and was worshiping the stuff. That's probably one of the, because I love the setting and I liked how it worked, and he definitely out of all the actors, I think he brought it home to me as far as like this crazy off kilter dude.
Yeah, I think I'm inclined to agree. Fuad is he's obviously the star of the movie. Bill Kerwin does a good job, but I got to go with Fuad as well. And I think my favorite scene in the movie, I don't know, man. I think it's a tie between the girl getting the tongue ripped out of her face and just the scenes of him cooking up the flesh. I love the dry ice and the stonework oven there. It's such a good touch. So yeah, that's been Blood Feast, guys. I don't know if there's too much else we can say about this. Anybody that hasn't seen the film should definitely get out there and check it out. It is available on Tubi. And just check out all the H.G. Lewis stuff. I think all of his splatter films are actually available on Tubi because they have that sort of partnership with Arrow or whatever. So it's real good prints of the movies on there as well. And you just really will not regret it. My next selection is going to be 2000 Maniacs, which you guys will see in around about 6 weeks or so. Obviously, Brandon's next selection is going to be our next episode. I don't know if you have that.
I was going to say, if I could maybe I could switch out with you so that I can have, because I want to do the Matroja Christmas special. And I feel like it would be more appropriate. Maybe I could switch out with you, and that'll also give Cody some time to get things rounded for his second.
Yeah, okay. I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll do 2000 Maniacs next then. So in 2 weeks we'll do 2000. Yeah, we'll back to back these things, and then that gives Cody a couple of weeks to come up with his selection, and then you'll go third so that we can do the Christmas special. So there it is, guys. Our next episode will be another H.G. Lewis flick 2 Saturdays from now, and that will be 2000 Maniacs. If you want to join us for that, Chad, you are more than welcome. It sounds like you got a genuine passion for this schlock as well. So get in the mix, buddy. It'll be a good time. A little bit more in-depth of a discussion we can have with 2000 Maniacs as well, because there's a little bit more material to dive into. This is one that I didn't take super detailed notes on because there isn't a whole lot to Blood Feast. It's really just the guy roaming around chopping ladies up, and it's a good time. But with just the two of us, an hour and some change, that's about the most that we can take it with Blood Feast in particular. Obviously, as his career with kind of stuff developed, Lewis got a little bit more ambitious with the plots and the characters and things like that and the various themes. So there will be a lot more to dig into in future episodes. So yeah, we'll see you back here 2 weeks from now with another episode for 2000 Maniacs. Be sure to check us out and all of our affiliated links in the description below. Definitely check out Dead and Lovely. They just recently did an episode on Blade 2 that was fucking hilarious. And we'll see you guys back here real soon. Thanks for watching.
Thank y'all.